In a small market town, an hour north of Nairobi, sometime in the early months of 2006, a Kenyan microfinance borrower picked up a basic Nokia phone and did something the British engineers in Cambridge had not built the product to do. She sent the money to her sister. The product she was using had been designed in London, funded by a British government aid grant, and built by a consultancy in Cambridge. It was meant to help her repay a small business loan by text message. She wasn't interested in repaying a loan by text message. She was interested in moving money to a person she could not afford to visit. Within a year, that quiet act would become the launch product of a company that would, within 20, process more money than its country produced in GDP. Today, it moves 41.68 trillion shillings a year, about 320 billion US dollars, across the simplest mobile menu in financial history. This is the story of how a British charity grant for loan repayment accidentally became the financial nervous system of a country. Hi again. Welcome back to the pod. My name is Farouk, and today we are going deep into the story of M-Pesa, a British charity grant for loan repayment that accidentally became the financial nervous system of a country. Let's get into it. To understand M-Pesa, you have to begin in a place that has almost nothing to do with Kenya. You have to begin in Newbury, England, in the Corporate Social Responsibility Department of Vodafone Group in the year 2002. The man at the center of it was named Nick Hughes. He was Vodafone's head of social enterprise, a job that meant, in practice, that he was responsible for finding development finance projects the company could champion. Hughes had been studying microfinance for a while, and the thing that bothered him was not the lending, it was the repayment. Microfinance institutions in East Africa were lending small amounts of money to large numbers of poor borrowers. Many of those borrowers were spending an entire day a week traveling to a Faulu Kenya or a Kenya Women Finance Trust office to hand over a 200-shilling installment. The bus fare alone could be a meaningful share of the loan. The whole system carried a deadweight cost that grew with every customer. Hughes's idea was small, technical, and aimed squarely at that one friction. Replace the bus journey with a text message. Let the borrower repay her loan from her phone. To fund it, he wrote a grant application to the British government, to a program called the Financial Deepening Challenge Fund, run out of the UK Department for International Development. The program required corporate applicants to match public money pound for pound. In 2003, DFID awarded Vodafone £1 million British pounds. Vodafone matched it. The total program budget was around £2 million. The product was not built by Vodafone. It was contracted to a Cambridge product development consultancy called Sagentia. Sagentia's brief was to build a SIM toolkit application, a small menu that would sit on the SIM card itself, so the customer would not need to download anything, would not need a smartphone, would not even need an internet connection. The menu would talk to a back-end transaction system over SMS. Encryption would happen at the SIM layer. The technology choice was the one that would later define the product's reach. By living on the SIM, M-Pesa would be able to run on a $20 Nokia feature phone. In 2007, Kenya, that meant nearly any phone. The pilot would be run in Kenya for a simple reason. Vodafone owned 40% of Safaricom. The distribution vehicle was already in place, and Kenya itself was an unusually well-suited country for the experiment. One dominant mobile operator with around 80% of the market, a single national language in Swahili, a central bank that had been quietly modernizing its payments framework, and an internal migration pattern that had created a permanent informal remittance flow. Vodafone seconded a mobile commerce specialist named Susie Loney to lead the pilot. Loney had deployed mobile payment products in Europe. She packed up and moved to Nairobi to work directly with the partner, a Kenyan Christian microfinance NGO called Faulu Kenya, and with the agents who would carry the new SIM cards. The whole effort was small. Fewer than 500 customers, 8 agent stores, a £2 million budget, 3 sites, the Nairobi Central Business District, Mathare, and Thika. The people running it did not set out to build a bank. They set out to make a bus journey go away. The M-Pesa pilot began on the 11th of October 2005 and ran for about 8 months. The product the team had built supported 4 things: a deposit at an agent, a withdrawal at an agent, a repayment to a Faulu loan account, and, almost as an afterthought, a peer-to-peer transfer between 2 customers. The engineering effort to add that last feature had been small. No one expected anyone to use it much. What happened in the pilot is the moment this product became what it became. The borrowers ignored the loan repayment feature. They used the peer-to-peer transfer instead. They sent money to relatives. They paid rent. They settled informal debts. They topped up a friend's airtime. They bought goods. The Faulu Microfinance officers, who had been trained to track loan repayments, kept reporting the same finding back to the pilot lead. The customers are treating this as a remittance product, not a credit product. They have decided what it is for. Susie Loney's pilot notes captured the inflection plainly. After running the pilot for about 9 months, she would later write, "We started to see customer behavior that said, actually, this is much more useful as a person-to-person money transfer system." The team did the thing that all good product teams do when their users tell them what the product actually is. They listened. They redesigned the launch around the use case the customers had invented. Inside Vodafone Group, this was not popular. Multiple shareholders told Safaricom's chief executive in 2006 that the product was, and this is the phrase he has used in interviews ever since, a stupid idea. An absolute waste of money. Time wasted. Inside Safaricom, there was a parallel concern. Mobile money would cannibalize voice and airtime revenue, which were the profit engines of the business. Customers who could move airtime peer-to-peer might displace the scratch card economy that paid the distribution. Michael Joseph overruled all of it. He has framed the call publicly several times since as the most contested decision of his Safaricom tenure. "I'm going to do it anyway." There was one more operational call before launch, and it was almost as consequential. Safaricom's existing airtime dealers, the network that sold the scratch cards, refused to carry M-Pesa. They could see accurately that this would eat their business. Rather than fight that war, Pauline Vaughan's team built a parallel agent network from scratch. Petrol stations, supermarkets, mobile phone repair stalls, corner shop dukas. A flat per-transaction commission split. Agents who would earn from float and float movement, not from airtime sale. That separation, agents incentivized to grow the platform, not to fight it, is what almost every analyst has since cited as the structural reason M-Pesa's distribution outscaled every other African mobile money rollout. They built the agent corridor in 2 halves. A thick footprint in Nairobi, where the senders lived. A thick footprint in the west, in Nyanza, in the coast, where the recipients lived. Send money home only works if the recipient can cash out within walking distance of where they live. The team built both ends of the corridor before launching. On the 6th of March 2007, in an office at Safaricom House in Nairobi, a senior product manager named Pauline Vaughan pressed send on the first commercial M-Pesa transaction. Nairobi to Mombasa. The team's first-year target was 300,000 customers. 1 week after launch, head office asked them to triple it to 1 million. They crossed 1 million in November. They closed the year on roughly 2 million. The forecast had undershot by a factor of 7. By the middle of 2008, M-Pesa had crossed 2 million users. It was moving cash at a velocity the licensed Kenyan banks could not match, with an agent footprint that was already beginning to outnumber every bank branch and post office in the country. The Kenya Bankers Association saw what was happening with complete clarity. A non-bank was running a deposit-taking, payment-clearing institution on terms that no commercial bank could legally match. M-Pesa was not subject to banking-grade Know Your Customer. It was not subject to capital adequacy rules. It was not paying deposit insurance. The agent network was growing inside the same retail real estate the banks had been trying to monetize for a generation. The banks did what incumbents do. They lobbied. Late in 2008, the Kenya Bankers Association petitioned the Ministry of Finance to order a formal statutory audit of M-Pesa. The framing was, in public, consumer protection. In private, it was competitive neutrality. The expected outcome was a regulatory finding that M-Pesa was an unlicensed banking operation, which would force Safaricom to acquire a full banking license. A multi-year process that, in practice, would have killed the agent network economics and ended the growth flywheel. What happened next is one of the most consequential regulatory rulings in modern African financial history. And in the way of most consequential rulings, the people who made it did not know at the time what they were writing. The Treasury referred the audit to the Central Bank of Kenya. The governor of the central bank at the time was an economist named Njuguna Ndungu. The central bank's payment service group, which had been quietly modernizing Kenya's payments framework since the early 2000s, did its own assessment. External assessors did a full information systems audit of the M-Pesa platform. While the audit was running, something else was happening to Kenya. In late December 2007, the country's presidential election produced a contested result. The 2 months that followed, what Kenyans now call the post-election violence, killed more than 1,000 people and displaced hundreds of thousands more. Some of the country's largest commercial banks were perceived, fairly or not, as politically aligned. Urban Kenyans began moving cash off the formal banking system. Many moved it to M-Pesa, which had the great political advantage of belonging, in the public imagination, to nobody. An estimated 1 million additional users came onto the platform during and immediately after the violence. The product became, in the worst weeks of the crisis, infrastructure for keeping money moving when the rest of the system could not be trusted. Against that backdrop, in January of 2009, the Treasury issued its finding. M-Pesa, the statement read, is not a banking service. It is a retail money transfer service. Customer balances are held in trust at a commercial bank, initially a single trust account at the Commercial Bank of Africa. The balances are not lent against. Safaricom does not perform credit creation. Therefore, Safaricom does not require a banking license. The ruling was, on paper, a narrow finding about a single Kenyan product. In practice, it was the regulatory template that every African mobile money product since MTN Momo, Airtel Money, Orange Money, Wave, EcoCash would be licensed under. Had the banks won the lobby, Safaricom would have spent the next 3 years acquiring a banking license, rebuilding the agent network under bank-style KYC, and watching the product flatten. They did not win. The lobby produced, by accident, the foundational regulatory architecture for the African fintech industry that exists today. The decade after the Treasury ruling is the decade in which M-Pesa stopped being a product and became a platform. By 2010, the network of M-Pesa agents, duka owners, petrol attendants, supermarket cashiers, mobile phone repair stalls outnumbered every ATM, every bank branch, and every post office in Kenya combined. The most accessible financial counter in the country was a corner shop. That fact alone rewired the assumptions of the Kenyan economy. What followed was a layered build, almost every layer of which was a partnership. In May of 2010, Safaricom and Equity Bank launched a joint product called M-Kesho, an Equity Bank savings account accessed through the M-Pesa menu, available at every M-Pesa agent. For Equity, it was a way to acquire over 1 million new account holders in months. For Safaricom, it was a way to extend M-Pesa from a transfer service into a savings service without acquiring a banking license. M-Kesho launched fast and grew fast. Then the math broke. Equity wanted a bigger share of the revenue. Safaricom wanted to retain the agent commission economics that made the float move. The dispute played out semi-publicly through 2011 and 2012. By 2014, M-Kesho was effectively wound down. The Equity Bank response is one of the great moves in modern African business. Refusing to be, in the phrase its leadership used publicly, a tenant on Safaricom's platform, Equity launched its own mobile network, an MVNO called Equitel, riding on Airtel's network and branded with a thin SIM that physically overlaid the Safaricom SIM in the same handset. Safaricom blocked the thin SIM at the regulator. It lost on appeal. Equitel went live. Equity then layered a smartphone banking app on top. This is the contested ground at the center of Asili Africa. Episode 1 of this series belongs to Equity. Episode 2 belongs to Safaricom. The product they fought over, both for it and against it, is the protagonist of this episode. While that fight unfolded, M-Pesa did what platforms do. It built the next layer. In November 2012, in partnership with the Commercial Bank of Africa, later NCBA, Safaricom launched M-Shwari, a fully mobile savings and microlending account with credit decisions made by algorithm in seconds on transaction history that Safaricom already had on every customer. It was the product that turned M-Pesa from a payments rail into a banking platform. In June 2013, Lipa na M-Pesa, merchant payments, the rails that turned every Kenyan duka into a payment terminal. In 2015, KCB M-Pesa, a competing savings and credit product with Kenya Commercial Bank. A deliberate decision to put two large banks at the table rather than one. In 2019, Fuliza, the world's first contextual mobile money overdraft. If your M-Pesa balance fell short at the moment of payment, Fuliza covered the shortfall as a short-term loan. The product extended credit at the exact second a customer needed it. By the middle of the 2020s, M-Pesa was moving more value annually than Kenya produced in GDP. The country's instant payment rails, its merchant payment rails, its microcredit rails, its savings rails, and a growing share of its insurance rails all ran on top of the same Sagentia-built SIM toolkit menu the engineers had shipped to Mathar in 2005. Outside Kenya, the picture was less impressive. Vodafone tried to ship M-Pesa to Tanzania in 2008 without repiloting. The agent economics were wrong, and the product limped for almost a decade. M-Pesa South Africa launched in 2010, relaunched in 2014, and was withdrawn in 2016 after losing 250 million rand. M-Pesa India ran from 2013 to 2019, folded into Phone P adjacent partnerships. Romania and Albania both shuttered. The lesson, drilled into the GSMA and CGApp literature for 15 years now, is that mobile money is not so much a transferable product as it is a distribution and regulator co-evolution. Kenya happened to have the regulator, the language, the operator concentration, the diaspora flow, and the agent footprint in alignment. Most countries don't. In the financial year ending March 2025, M-Pesa moved 41.68 trillion shillings of value through its rails. That is roughly $320 billion, a number that exceeds Kenya's nominal GDP and is in the neighborhood of the GDP of South Africa. M-Pesa is now 44.2% of Safaricom's Kenyan service revenue. It is, by the disclosure Safaricom itself made to investors this year, materially more important than the voice and data business that gave birth to it. The Kenyan technology analyst Moses Kemibaro put the situation in one line: M-Pesa is eating Safaricom. In late 2022, Vodacom and Safaricom carved M-Pesa out into a Nairobi-headquartered joint venture called M-Pesa Africa. The chief executive is Sitoyo Lopokoyit, a longtime Safaricom operator. The structure is a bet that M-Pesa is now a financial services business, not a telco feature, and should be capitalized, governed, and quite possibly listed as such. In August of 2023, M-Pesa Ethiopia launched, the first full re-export of the M-Pesa stack since the Tanzania attempts, this time under a deliberately rebuilt local stack with a separate central bank license and a locally trained agent network. By May 2025, the product had crossed $1.2 billion of transactions and 10 million subscribers. The internal target for 2030 is 70 million. The two open questions are domestic. The first is the trust gap. During the June 2024 mass protests against a finance bill, civil society organizations accused Safaricom of sharing subscriber data with security agencies. The company denied it. The Law Society of Kenya filed a constitutional petition at the High Court, alleging that investigators had been routinely accessing subscriber data without judicial authorization. The litigation is ongoing. The cohort that animates the process is the same cohort that will determine M-Pesa's next decade. The second is competition. The 2025 launch of the ZD Money Market Fund, Safaricom's in-house investment product, drew allegations that the company had granted ZD zero-rated access to M-Pesa rails while charging competitors. It is a textbook anti-competitive dominance complaint, and it is the kind of complaint that, in markets the size of M-Pesa's, tends to attract regulatory attention eventually. The product that began as a £2 million DFID experiment is now one of the most consequential pieces of financial infrastructure in the Southern Hemisphere. The current chief executive of M-Pesa Africa has been honest about the company's own surprise at this. "We didn't know," he said publicly in December 2025, that M-Pesa would be this successful. Almost nobody did. Every empire has an origin. M-Pesa's was a grant application in Newbury, England, written to solve the cost of a bus ride to a microfinance office. The customers it was meant to serve picked up the phone, ignored the feature it was built for, and used it instead to send money to people they loved. The team listened. This is a silly Africa. That is the story. And like every story worth telling, this one is still being written. If this episode made you see something differently, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I am Farouk. This is Asili Africa. Every empire has an origin. Now you know this one. So, start building, because yours might be tomorrow's origin story. See you on the next one.